Welcome everyone to another Moldex 3D webinar series in the 2022 version here. Today we're going to be talking about enhancing a complete mold assembly with AutoGrid, a very new feature in, well, not necessarily a new feature, but something that's been very well enhanced in the upcoming 2022 version. So we'll be going through that as well as a description of, how does AutoGrid actually work and how can it benefit us when we're dealing with complex systems. All right, the topics here. What is AutoGrid? We're going to go through, defining AutoGrid. How does that compare versus the boundary layer meshing style that we're all very familiar with, hopefully? What are the pros and cons? And then we're going to look at some introductions into AutoGrid and how we can use that to mesh a full mold assembly. All right, so starting off here with AutoGrid. AutoGrid, or eDesign as it's more commonly referred to. eDesign is kind of the style in the front space of the software. Something Grid is kind of behind the scenes. But they're both the same sort of style. They allow you to automatically generate the solid mesh for a geometry that doesn't have a complete or perfect surface mesh. And that's a very important note because although it does still need a closed volume, meaning that there's no missing surfaces or overlapping surfaces, you can actually have meshing problems. Let's say like aspect ratios, or if surfaces aren't perfectly connected with one another, maybe there's surfaces that are overlapping other surfaces. I should say surfaces that are overlapping other geometries, not within the same geometry, which we'll get into later. But it's a lot more lenient as far as the meshing goes, and it's a lot more automated of a style. It uses what's called voxel type elements, which are very similar to this netting that you see. They're just basically a bunch of Lego bricks that are stacked on top of one another to approximate the volume of the solid geometry that we're importing. And this was actually the first style of meshing that was developed in Moldex 3D for all components of the mold. So when we first started out, eDesign or voxel type meshing was kind of the premier solid meshing style and what kind of propelled Moldex 3D to where we are today. Now the pros of eDesign. Now eDesign and AutoGrid get kind of thrown back and forth. AutoGrid is more used for the cooling system. eDesign is used for the melt system, but they are very much the same type of meshing style. eDesign uses a more automatic meshing approach. That's one of the main benefits of it. You don't have to go through and fix the surface mesh as intensely as you do with boundary layer meshing. The solid geometry defines the volume. Then the voxel elements are used to fill that volume completely, whether there's a perfect surface mesh or not. The surface mesh really just defines the shell or the volume that we're using to fill. And then the voxel elements, which aren't going to be necessarily a perfect approximation of the geometry, but they are just going to be filling the geometry with as much elements as possible to approximate that volume, more or less.